We are here at the Long Beach Sunnyside Cemetery and Municipal Cemetery for the 27th annual cemetery tour put on by the incredible folks at the Long Beach Historical Society. People like me who grew up in Long Beach, we see street names and building names and we understand that there's stories and people behind some of those names, but we don't always get a chance to know what they are. And today we have an incredible group of actors who are going to tell some of those stories that are funny and heartwarming and really important to the history of our city. So tune in now to see one of those stories happen.
Bienvenidos. I am Sadie Linares, and this is my daughter, Narcissa. My family is descended from the founders who came to Los Angeles in the 1700s. My husband, Pilar Linares, is buried nearby. We were here before you gringos arrived.
She's Sadie, as you can see on her marker, and I'm Nora. We lived in California during the roaring 20s when everything changed, including our names.
Pilar was a vaquero. The Bixbys valued his skill with horses and cattle. Even Sarah Bixby Smith mentioned him in her famous book, Adobe Days. I fell for him the first time I saw that twinkle in his eyes.
Dad worked for the Bixbys, and when John took over Rancho Los Alamitos, Dad helped manage the livestock.
A vaquero's job was to round up and brand cattle and get them ready for market. For sport, they hunted the coyotes that threatened their calves.
No. Let's get to the part where I come into the family. I'm Richard Bird Hinton, World War I veteran and Nora's most important husband.
Pilar worked hard, and we saved our money. We bought land, and we built a house on Anaheim, near where the Long Beach Playhouse stands today. We farmed and started a dairy.
That's where my brothers and I grew up. They didn't want to become vaqueros like Dad. And I didn't want to be just a ranch housewife either.
Your brothers learned to play golf on the course across the street from our house, before the city bought the land and turned it into recreation park.
By then, they were playing in pro golf tournaments.
You didn't have the chances your brothers had to mingle with golfers and see things beyond dairies and ranchos.
That's right, I didn't. I met a boy who came from a family like ours. His name was James Silvas. His family was from Portugal rather than Mexico, but they did the same work. They were sheep herders and worked at dairies.
He was a very sweet boy.
And the first one who was interested in me. We got married in 1912 when I was 15.
A year later, your son, Ernest James, was born. I was a young grandmother, and Pilar was overjoyed at being a grandfather. Pilar was working for John Bixby when we met. When John died, he continued to work for his son, Fred. He was the loyal vaquero. When Mr. Bixby's third child was another daughter, Pilar was so upset that he didn't get the son he wanted that Pilar actually wept for him. There were no sons to carry on the Bixby name.
You left out some details. He didn't just weep. He got drunk and had to be bailed out of jail.
Let's not talk about that. You weren't even born yet. When you and James married, you lived on a dairy where James worked. It was hard raising a baby on a dairyman's salary.
I met Richard Bird Hinton when I was in town one day.
Finally, we come to the good part of the story.
He worked in the harbor in a factory that canned local produce for sale in faraway places. He swept me off my feet with his red hair and blue eyes. We got married in 1917. Oh, he told me he'd been married before, but he promised me we would settle down in a nice neighborhood.
Then the Germans submarined a ship carrying innocent Americans and...
You said you had to join the army to protect our country. Right. You shipped out to Fort Lewis and left your new family behind. I didn't want to follow you around as a soldier's wife. That's not the life you promised me. We divorced.
You and little Ernest moved in with Pilar and me. Your second divorce. What were you thinking? Your father and I were a good example of a couple working hard together to take care of their children. How did you turn out so wrong?
I wanted a different life. I saw my brothers Al and Dick playing golf with celebrities in Hollywood. I didn't want to be just another wife having babies to carry on someone else's name.
That's the attitude that led you to men like Arthur St. George. He traveled the country as a musician, playing with orchestras and dance bands. He lived in Minnesota and even traveled to big cities like Chicago and Kansas City.
He said he was married, and he even had a child, but he was very unhappy with a wife who wanted him to give up music and performing.
Then you found out he also performed as a bigamist. The LA district attorney charged him with forging a marriage license so he could live with Erolinda Ortiz, the girlfriend he had before you. He only stayed out of jail because she died before she could testify against him.
He was heartbroken when she died. He cared for her. I helped him through his mourning. But then he went back on the road with the band, and we separated.
That's when you met B.M. Gerardo.
He came from a distinguished local family like ours. He seemed to be the admirable husband I had long hoped for you to find. But it all went wrong. Not only did Art St. George forge his marriage license to that other poor woman, he also forged your divorce papers. B.M. demanded an annulment. It was over. You and Ernest moved in with your father and me. Again.
We were safe with you, and Ernest loved being with his grandparents. You watched Ernest while I worked in a dime store.
Oil discoveries had changed everyone's life. So Sadie and Pilar leased off some of their land and closed the dairy.
Then Pilar passed away in 1925. The newspapers interviewed me. They said your father was the oldest Latino resident of Long Beach and represented the old days of the ranchos.
I worked to help support all of us until I met the final love of my life. He said he was related to the famous Biscaluz family. His cousin was Gene, the sheriff of Los Angeles County.
Again, you believed a smooth-talking man. He shared the sheriff's last name, but none of his family connections. He was just a laborer who expected you to keep working to take care of him.
Yes, I divorced him. It was the last time I tried marriage. Ernest and I stayed with you as he grew up. And when my brother Al's marriage faltered, he moved in with us too. That's how we got through the Depression.
In 1943, the Second World War turned Long Beach into a busy place, filled with sailors and Navy ships and a plant making airplanes for the war. That year, you got sick and died. We buried you here, not far from your father.
You died just a few months later. Oh, you had a beautiful rosary service at Mautel's funeral home. When my brother Dick died, he joined us here.
His family added his name to our marker. And here we are, together forever.
Thank you for listening to our story and for supporting the Historical Society of Long Beach.